Hello, everybody. It's the Alco Diesel guy with another project for you. It's my night off, so it's time to do a model railroad project, as I always like to do on my nights off. In this case, it's an RSC2 that was supposed to be an RS2. Long story short, I bid on this Union Pacific RS2 because I had been looking for one desperately to run on my mid-scale model train layouts collection, keep my collection, etc. Could not find one for a reasonable price. Had to spend a lot of crazy money to get a hold of one. Was really having a hard time with it. Then this thing showed up out of nowhere. Was on eBay. The pictures were a bit on the cagey side, but they very clearly showed this engine as being an RS2. So, of course, at that point, I said, hey, why not? So I went ahead and bid on it, won the engine, had it shipped to me. But what I received, despite the fact that the box very clearly shows, and I'll maybe try to splice a picture in from that auction, very clearly shows this engine as being an RS2. Wound up being an RSC2. So, of course, I contacted the seller and said, what the heck? I paid for an RS2, not an RSC2. Make this right. The seller immediately started telling me what a great deal I got and everything else, blah, 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 but also insisted that this was the locomotive I had bid on, even though very clearly the pictures showed it being an RS2, because, again, there were clear shots of the box, and this is clearly an RSC2. So after going back and forth, I finally decided to call the seller's bluff because we were holding out on return shipment on the item. I went ahead and said, okay, I'll pay the return shipping. Let's just get this done with. The seller then emailed me and let me know, or messaged me, I should say, and let me know that the locomotive in question that was an RS2 apparently didn't exist. And this was, in fact, the engine I bid on, despite the fact that it very clearly is an RSC2, not an RS2. So at this point, I was kind of SOL at that point, and it was also I was also getting busy at work again. I didn't have time to deal with this. And admittedly, yes, the price was great, which is what the seller continued to emphasize. Anywho, I had plans that I could do to work around this. I had another RSC2, which I was going to put trucks on, and then ended up actually re-chassising that. If you look at my video, I'll post a link in this where I actually had to re-chassis that engine because the chassis was so far gone. I didn't realize how bad that thing was. In the end, I actually found it was a lot easier just to buy a used engine, swap everything over, and I didn't need the parts I bought for that engine, so they still exist. So what I'm going to do tonight is I'm going to convert this RSC2 to an RS2. Now, there are a couple of reasons why I don't run RSC2s. The main reason being is most railroads didn't find the RSC2 very useful. The main problem being is that the RS2s, as they aged, didn't do very well in terms of their reliability. The RSC2 trucks were a standard type of truck, I believe, but they weren't very popular, so they were harder to get components for. And most railroads that wanted an RS2 wanted something with 4 axles on it. Some of these trucks actually wound up on EMD units because the RS2, as it aged, didn't have great reliability in terms of their prime movers. And unlike the RS3s, were not as easy to rebuild because they had different lengths. These RS2s were actually slightly shorter than the RS3s. Very nicely packaged. It has the couplers, as you see in the side, as it should. It has the stock couplers from Kato. Again, the RS3, these, I should mention before I go any further, these couplers are quite testy. They do not provide much in terms of give on curves. So any car you hook up with this, unless you change these couplers, will go flying off your tracks. So you have been warned. I have learned this from experience. Take it from the guy who's making mistakes on these things. Replace these couplers. And I will show you how to do that. As part of this upgrade, I'm going to be changing these out to microtrains couplers. Now, a little bit further background on this. There is, in fact, a slight length difference between the RS2 and the RS3, by roughly half a foot to a little bit over that much. That was apparently enough to stop the Green Bay and Western, as I mentioned before, from fully rebuilding their units like they did their RS3s into RS20s. Their RS2s, apparently what they did there was they took their 244s out of the RS3s they were rebuilding and went ahead and rebuilt those and threw them into these RS2s. And they didn't last too long with the company. They essentially got sold off. One of them actually wound up on the Michigan Northern, which I covered briefly in my D&H Shark video. Feel free to check that out for a little bit more info on what that railroad did with the RS2. I don't cover too much in detail, but it's there. So here you're looking at this engine, typical Kato, and it's in very good shape. It clearly has not seen much in the way of mileage. Wheels look brand new. I hope everyone's enjoying the new lighting that I've installed. I did put in a few more lights here on my workbench. There's another lot of people that have been complaining about that. I was finally able to get that taken care of. Wheels look pretty darn good. So this definitely looks like it has been very limited of any use on it. Won't matter because these trucks are going to go bye-bye on it. The details are all in place on the front and back. You got the brake wheel, again, which is separately applied. As is typical with all Kato models, they basically use the prototype. Most of the RS2 models would eventually get retrofitted or with a second horn in the front, or from the factory would get this pod assembly with a a horn that would mount to the cab that would have horns in both directions. This still has the singular horn going out the long hood, which was again the actual front of this locomotive. Again, these locomotives are designed to operate long hood forward, not short hood forward, but this engine from the factory operates short hood forward, and the decoder manufacturers have made the same mistake. And I do have a decoder I'm going to use to upgrade the DCC on this, upgrade this to DCC. The mentality was, again, back in the day when these engines were built, that the cab was always at the back of the locomotive, and the equipment that propelled the locomotives, or in this case, this diesel engine, was in the front. That's just how they were designed. And in later times, they found that this actually created a huge blind spot. It was safer to have the cab in the front, even though you would lose the crashability or protection of having all of that equipment ahead of the engineer and operating in mainline service. Hence the reason why, as I mentioned before, these had eventually been refitted with horns on either side, because even though short hood operation would be awkward for an engine set up for long hood forward operations, it was possible. And some railroads would even modify the cabs on these engines, as I understand, to make that easier. Some would go to the next level, actually chopping the nose, although most of that happened with the RS3s, because again, these were just a little bit too short to turn into more modern variants with the 251 engines on board, like the RS20, and a few other variations that were made later on with 251 engines. Again, the 244s, as I've mentioned in detail in all of my documentaries, were fine initially, but it initially wore out depending upon how much mileage you put on these locomotives. Especially as they got older, they became real troublemakers and they broke constantly. This was long after Alco was out of business, so many railroads, if they were going to keep these going, could still get access to 251s. They would just rebuild them. Green Bay and Western, again, built the RS20. The Delaware and Hudson did a few of these rebuilds as well and had mixed results with them, or good luck depending upon who you speak to. But what I understand on a whole, they were really good rebuilds, except maybe slightly underweighted for the extra 600 horsepower they gained, or was it 300 horsepower they gained with the 251 over the, which is 1800, yeah, about 300 horsepower that they gained with the 251 over the old 244. Actually, about 200, I think the 251s, the again 1600 horsepower, 1600 I think was the normal horsepower rating for the RS3. The 251's lowest horsepower rating for a 12-cylinder was 1800. Well, yeah, that's the whole background on this. For more information, go check out my videos on it. Looking at the details on this engine again, we have all this nicely stenciled in. Again, it's just based upon the prototype. So all the details you're seeing here are basically what you would find on the prototype engine, just with this particular paint scheme. It says serves all the West. It also says home road of the streamliners on the side. That's one of the things that attracted me to this. It's a pretty cool little logo. As we can see, the fuel filler is engaged or both underneath the cab. This would lead later change because the fuel tank was extended and moved to the center, so the fuel filler and actual gauge were placed on the tank itself because it was made larger, and apparently this was a big mess of tubing, etc., to get actually hooked up underneath the cab. Fuel tank again is still located underneath the frame, but not as big. This is being messed around with later on in this locomotive's life to give it more capacity when it was turned into the RS3. And some RS2s had modifications to move the fuel filler into the middle. That was done at the factory, and they were also upgraded to 1600 horsepower. The precious few of those engines that ever did exist, and I don't think any of those actually still run. I think one of them is still sitting on the Michigan Northern, not the Michigan Northern, pardon me, the name of that railroad escapes me right now. The Detroit and Mackinac, which became also known as the Lake State Railroad. That's what it was. They had one of these that was upgraded as such. And even though it was an RS2, it was an RS2 that was upgraded to an RS3. So it had the fuel filler moved over here. But anyways, we can see this is definitely set up as a traditional RS2. Again, no modifications, just a different paint scheme. All the railings in place. It looks like it's in really good work. It looks like it's in really good shape. Let's go now and give this thing a shot on my test track, which I have set up over here. I'm going to hook up my analog power pack to this and see how well it runs. I'm going to zoom you guys out so you can see better. Let me go grab my analog power pack thing. Okay, so I have my RSC2 from Kato on the tracks right here. Just going to double check to make sure I have that railed correctly. Always looks like it's off the track for some reason on this re-rail. Again, this is 6-axle, so we'll see how it works. Another thing I should note also is that despite this being a 6-axle engine, in real life, the prototype was unpowered in the center axle. Obviously, that'd be too much trouble for a model manufacturer to do for an engine like this. It'd be very difficult to make the gear shaft setup. So the center axle is powered in this case, which is not realistic, but it does the job. Again, you're not going to notice this when you run it, except for the extra pulling power. Anywho, let's just give this thing a test and prove without further ado whether it works or not. Turning my throttle up here. Oh, there it goes. Typical Kato, very smooth running. And this is bone stock. There's nothing about it at all. Right, the other way just to be sure. Another detail I forgot to point out earlier is that this in fact has, of course, the earlier air-cooled turbocharger. This is signified by the lengthwise smokestack on the top here. If this was water-cooled, it would be widthwise. So it's a little detail there. I'll zoom in a little bit more just so you can see that. Again, lengthwise as opposed to widthwise. Let's go now and give this a shot going the opposite direction. So yeah, it runs beautifully. It does exactly what it should do. Typical Kato, very smooth operating properties, and one of the reasons why these engines have such a reputation. So, without any further ado, now that I know that I have a working engine, and have confirmed it again, because I did check this originally, I'm going to go ahead now and get started on upgrading this locomotive and modernizing it so it can be used on a modern railroad layout. Now, we have to remember how old this model is. These were introduced in the very late 90s, if I remember correctly. And that was before the sort of knuckle couplers became standard. So to have an engine at those days that had a knuckle coupler on it was pretty cool. But for the fact that these couplers kind of suck, for lack of a better term. Start with, as I mentioned, these springs on this coupler are extremely tight. So there's no room for give on the curves. So what we're going to do eventually here is we're going to pull these pins and upgrade this to microtrains couplers. Another detail is the DCC readiness. You could get these in fact, DCC ready out of the factory, but the fact of the matter is it was not available sold with the DCC decoder. That said, several manufacturers make decoders. The one I'm going to use tonight is going to be from a company called NCE, which admittedly I found after digging through my stash of supplies. I'm not sure when I got this. I don't even remember having it. It is their model N14K2. It has the LEDs on the front, so I don't have to worry about the actual grounding issues, but I am going to nonetheless tape underneath it just to make sure. I'll show you how to do that later on. Without further ado, I need to get some parts out here to go on with the next step here. One moment, please, while I grab those. Okay, I would have loved to tell you right now that it's only been a couple of minutes, but it's actually been a little bit over a week. Because when I attempted to do the conversion on this, I could not locate the actual trucks to make this an RS2. I thought I'd lost them, so I ended up going to Kato after basically a night of tearing apart my room trying to find them. No sooner do I get that order in, I think it was actually the next night, because I had 2 nights off, I found this. That's right, that's the truck, and I found this in a box. So, I can finally proceed with this thing and get it going. Let's go pull it back out. As you see, I did pack it back up again. Okay, so let's get to work on this. I'm going to now first actually carefully remove the shell on this. Keep this out of the way for the time being. And this is a pressure fit shell, so a little bit pressure is all you need to get it off. These tend to be a little bit easier, I find, than the Atlas a lot of times. They can get caught on the board on board. I'm not too concerned about messing up the stock board. But for the fact I find I can use these clips on certain types of decoders, so I will keep this. Now to get this out, I'm going to take it down first of all to 3 times zoom. There we go. I'm going to now use a Phillips head screwdriver and remove the 2 screws here as such. Or actually loosen them. I will again be putting a decoder in here, so this board is going to come out and stay out. Time you're ready, board. There we go. One board, which shall be kept safely over here, because I know I can use these things now for the metal clips on them. So now we have the chassis exposed. I can now get the trucks out. I'm going to have to loosen this up a little bit more, it looks like. And I think I'm going to take the base plate, this base fuel tank off here. Even more light for you. Okay, that's one truck off. After you loosen, they should literally just pop off like that. There we go. So now I have the two RSC2 trucks. These are perfectly usable, so I'm going to keep them. Excuse me, my cough is pretty bad. Still pretty bad. And I do see some wear and tear now, and I can take a closer look at them. Not too much. You can see a little mark on the things. Looks like they were run a little bit, but not much. Anywho, doesn't matter too much. I'm going to put these in storage. And again, what I have to replace them are two new trucks from the likes of Kato directly. You can actually still buy these trucks. These are the roller bearing variety as opposed to the others which have friction bearings on them. But I'll show you. And again, that is accurate, as the RS2 is mainly shipped with friction bearing trucks like these, or journal bearing trucks. So here are the journals, whereas this one has the roller bearings. If you're wondering where I got these from, it literally is, again, if I don't know if I mentioned this, from Kato, and actually they're cheaper than this. They actually go for $5 a piece, not $10, is what I found when I bought them online. That's per truck, but still, for $10 you get two new trucks. And I mean, you can't really argue with those prices, can you? I'm not sure if Kato's just looking to get rid of these because there isn't much demand for them or anything else, but that's what's going on. I'm just going to rip this bag open now and get this truck out of here. Probably going to put a little lubricant on here because this is just completely dry, and I don't like putting dry things in place. Immediately you can tell that is very smooth running. Definitely a Kato quality part. So I got just a dab of this grease. I'm not going to put a lot on here. I'm just going to put a teeny tiny dab on the worm gears themselves. And I mean just about as small as I can possibly get it. Going to go in from the bottom. Squeeze. There it is. Just that little bit is all you need. And again here, just a little squeeze. There we go. Teeny tiny dab more. There we go. That's what I'm going to put on it. And that's all you need. So with all that, I'm just going to seal this up again. Done with my greasing. Now I'm going to start putting the thing back together. First, these lousy contact lines. They are very loose for some reason. I find this happens after, if the model's been sitting around for a while, they'll just get very, very loose. There we go. I shall now place this on here. Making sure I put the guide, making sure this contact goes underneath the guides. Keeps coming out. Let me now just put my fuel tank back on to stop us from getting any crazy ideas. There we go. Now I saw one of these things pull out here, and I don't know where I put it. Oh, boy, I hope I didn't knock it out of the way. Lost one of the washers. That's nice. I had it right in front of me, and I managed to lose it. Oh, here it is. Got it. Don't want to lose these little parts, folks. Trust me, you don't want to lose them. They may seem easy to get a hold of. They're not. So, what I'm going to do next is I'm going to put the decoder in first, and then I'll put the trucks back on because of how this fell apart. And I do have a decoder all set here. It's an NEC variety. It's their model. Try to bring this up without making you nauseous. It's an N14K2. Again, that's by NEC. There are several other models. I've even tried a Digitrax Trax decoder that didn't come with the side clips, which is the main difference in a lot of these decoders. Which, strangely enough, saying for most Kato models, it did fit it, but it didn't have the side clip things for the motors. I'll show you what they look like in a second here again. You can use that one, but you have to extract the clips off your decoder itself. Here's the board. It comes in very nicely. Stashed, I might add. You see it has these clips soldered in place. I was able to clip, in the past, I've been able to clip these on by unsoldering them and putting them back in place. And not even resoldering them again. Not necessarily recommending that, but it did work, and it saved me on the decoders, which I bought, which were the wrong ones. But they were the right type, right fit. They just didn't have the clips. So it's now, or the motor pickups, or whatever you'd like to call these clips on the sides. Although I think they are referred to as clips. So let's now start by making sure these are aligned. We want to make sure both of these motor pickups touch this. Again, a little bit different from the Atlas design. One goes down from the top on the motor. The other one comes up from the bottom. And this is designed to just slip right over them. I'm pretty sure these were designed with DCC readiness in mind. When they were built, this is in the late 90s, just when DCC was coming out. There it is, slip that in place. Be very careful not to bend this decoder board. And slide it forward as such. And there we go, it's in place. That literally is all there is to it. Then I'm going to... Well, I think I'm going to have to solder this again. Yeah, you see how loose that is? I'm going to have to solder this, so I'm going to have to now do a little bit more work than I thought on this. So I shall get out my soldering iron and do some work, which I happen to have sitting right next to me. And do a quick little patch here and put some solder on that. And by soldering, what I'm going to do is just put a little bit on these two contact points right here so it fits in securely. And that should fix my problem and get this to fit tightly. Okay, I just finished doing the soldering, as you can see here. I'm going to go now and just install this. Take number 172. Okay, this now should slide. This is where it gets a little tricky. You have to get this contact underneath the pickup. The motor pickup has to connect the motor clip from the decoder. So it's a little bit tricky to get in here. I have to line all three of those parts up and just shove it forward. Oh yeah, that's a much firmer fit. Maybe a little bit too firm. It should go in there. Looks like I'm going to have to go and make some more tweaking. Oh yeah, it's not in right. That's too high up. All right, I got to go back and fix this a little bit here. Oh, good God. All right. Okay, take number 373. Not that I don't trust myself, but I don't. I'm going to leave my extractor fan on and just see if I can slip this in now. And I've taken some of the solder off, as you can see on the front there. Hopefully that will be just enough to get it in. And lining that carefully up. Very precise movement has to be done here to get this in. Let's see if it goes in. Yep, that's much better. That will fit in back here. Yep. Kind of close to that pickup wall there, but apparently that's going to work. Okay, so I fixed that. Alrighty. Off comes my iron. And I'm ready to continue assembling this thing now. Always something, I guess. Okay, I just realized I didn't put any Kapton tape on this. Oh, you can tell I'm tired, can't you? I think that I'll actually be good on the top if I look right here. Yeah, this is clear. So I don't think the top is a problem because these come isolated from the factory. I think I'm just going to put some Kapton tape right across here. And I think that'll be fine. Go grab some of that. Okay, some Kapton tape later. Okay, it's not perfect, but it'll stop it from making contact with the shell right there. This sticks well enough. That's all I'm concerned about. Not the greatest install of my life, but it'll work. Okay, I got the tape to stick down again. I managed to take some of that paper off on the side, so this will work now. Let's go and get the rest of the assembly done. I've got my trucks again. I've just put a little grease on the bottom of the actual worm gear itself. These should just snap right in place. There we go. Truck 1 is in place. And truck 2. Again, these are the same assembly for both sides to keep things very simple on Kato's part. And there we are. The second truck is now installed. Contact lines are in good shape. Okay, now it's time to put the screws back in place and tie the whole thing up. Okay, and there we are. The chassis has essentially been reassembled, although the tape is letting go again, I see, but I think that'll work well enough. Now I'm going to test this thing briefly to make sure that the system is good. The light went off again, but I'm pretty sure if I hit the light button again, like so. Yep, there it is. That was the problem. And I can change directions. Let's see, do we have forward? Yes. Backward? Yep. Forward. Ooh, pretty fast. And I remember to tune this a little bit. I'll do that a little bit later. But now I know my chassis is in good shape. So, the next step, before I put everything back together, I want to do a little bit of a modification to the locomotive itself. Now, these particular RSC2 models from Kato are very well made. They have an excellent drivetrain, etc. They even come with knuckle couplers, and for the late 90s, that was a big deal. The only trouble is these knuckles weren't designed very nicely. If we look at them, there is no give. They're just extremely tight. So you try to take this around any kind of curve, it will knock the train off the track, especially if you have a truck-mounted coupler. It's just not going to work. So how do I get around this? Well, first off, I'm going to put this in my foam thing here to work on it. The solution is actually pretty simple. I'm going to install Microtrain's couplers on this. These are the 2004-1, I believe that is. I'll put a note in my comments if I'm not correct on that, but I believe this is a 2004-1. These are the underslung short couplers. They're designed specifically for this model. If I remember correctly, in a lot of the similar ones. Install is actually extremely simple. A lot of people freak out about this, but it's not actually bad. You see the coupler assembly comes assembled with that package. I happen to have two of them here. The package fell apart, so I'm just going to use it also because I want to make sure I utilize them before they get lost, because they are a pain to keep track of. Let me go grab my tweezers. First step is to get rid of the coupler clip right over here. This will work also on an Atlas engine that has this particular clip. There are quite a few of them that do from N scale. I'm just going to gently try to pop this up. And be very careful not to apply too much force because this will go flying. I do have an extra one, but I don't want to use it if I don't have to. There we go. Yes, there it is. Managed to pop that up. There's one coupler clip down, gone. Right there. I'm just going to put this to the side. Magnetic part spin won't help you here because there's nothing magnetic about this. And now this coupler can just simply be pulled right out. And here's the new coupler, again, installing it upside down for microtrains. It just goes right into the original slot. Bit of a tight fit. You have to put a little pressure to get this thing to go in. Line that hole up with the coupler retaining hole. And then you take your coupler clip and put it right back in. Now, I should mention that microtrains does include small screws with this. In fact, I'll dig one out. That are designed to literally go in place of the coupler clip. I don't know how well these work. It's supposed to screw right into that, but I prefer to just use the clip because I happen to have it A and B. They're much easier to work with, in my opinion. Your opinion and mileage may vary on this. The coupler clip, again, these two notches always face out right over here. I just knocked something down. That's nice. I'm just going to line her up. See if I can clip this in place. There it is. Gently apply a little pressure, and that's it. Literally, that's it. I've now installed my coupler. See, it's nice and tight in there. It's going to hold on. And the height will be correct because these have already been factory tested for that. I'm going to do the same on this other side here. Again, I'm going to carefully dig this one out very carefully. This clip has to come out, so this is the trickiest part of it. I've heard to use tweezers, and I use as little pressure as possible to get it free. Problem again with a model like this that's been sitting for a while, or maybe since it's been new. Oh, there, I pulled the whole chassis apart. You can see how tightly this is in. Is that these don't always want to come separate very easily. Ah, there it goes. I managed to get it with my thumb. There's the clip again. Ouch. Again, I'm going to pull this oversprung coupler right out of here. See how unforgiving those springs are. Cast it to the side. It's pretty much useless unless you're going to display the model or unless you want to sell it. That's the only time that ever is useful. And you don't want to sell your couplers with it. These couplers don't cost too much. You can get them for less than 20 bucks if you know where to look. Mine were even cheaper than that because they're old stock. You can tell they're the old stock because they have the brass brake hose on the bottom. The new ones are all blackened. They're still metal, but they're blackened instead, as I understand. And very patriotic, as, again, Microtrain still makes all of its stuff in the USA. There it is. Got it in finally after a little pressure. You have to. I really don't like applying pressure like this. Sorry for the rough angles, but it's just how it has to work. So now I got my coupler in place. Let's put the clip back in place. And facing the two notches here out. And making sure I can see the hole through the bottom here. There it is. It's in place. And that does it. So with that, I got the two Magnamatic KD couplers installed. Microtrains couplers installed, although it is actually not too far off. Microtrains used to be part of KD back in the day. It's now time to put the whole thing back together. Again, the cab goes over these two bolster thingies on the side, these two sort of middle humps. Line everything up and gently press the shell into place. Okay, and with that, I've got it all done. Let's go now make one last test and assign it its locomotive number. Get you out to 5. Smoke test. Putting the shell on can actually cause a short. Well, actually, no, I didn't have the power on. Sorry. Okay, now, we're this time for real. Smoke test. It's probably going to take off by itself because this decoder, because this thing constantly jumps onto full power. Yep, there it goes. That worked. Sent some things flying on my workbench, but it's okay. There it is. It stayed on the track too, so that's good. Oh, well, this truck came off a little bit. Let's just make sure that's good. Darn throttle keeps going to full speed when I put the thing on. I will say that unlike the Digitrax decoders, these are less of an aggressive decoder. In terms of the speed, you have more options, in my opinion. Okay, so we're going to now program her. I'm going to use just going to use the program track. Actually, the main track. This is address 3, which we're going to change her to. No, I got to go back through this again because I went too many steps. Main track, address 3. It's going to be 1281. There it is. It jerked, which means it took the address. Okay. Oh, yeah. That runs really nice. So we have another completed locomotive. All right. And so just like that, I have converted this engine up to from an RSC2 to an RS2. And it looks really beautiful. I love these roller bearing trucks. I've got more of these on order. Since I couldn't find the first load, I'm going to put more of these on. I got to get them in black too. So anyway, that's going to do it for this video. If you liked it, give it a thumbs up. If not, thumbs down. Please like and subscribe. And as always, keep the metal side down.